Recording in progress. Good evening. It is Monday, February 6th, 2023, for the evening and weekends Delta class. Today, we're going to be reviewing component life cycles. We've talked about it a little bit. I've talked about it a little bit. I've seen it used in the course. I've used life cycle methods in the course to show you kind of how to get things to trigger while leveraging the life cycle of what React is and does to make some kind of auxiliary things occur, outside of your state changes or any hooks you kind of have. Lifecycle methods are, we've got a cool little diagram here at the end that would help a lot. Let's just jump straight into that actually. Actually, no, we'll start here. The following is a review of component lifecycle for React. Before we start with a component in its natural state, this is a component in its natural state. All looks familiar to me. We got class, app, logo. This is basically exactly what you see when you create a React app the first time. We could also throw in a constructor that allows us to add state and or props. Right here, I don't think that's fully a constructor. Basically, we've got state here, and then we got articles. You got an array here that we can put stuff into. You may or may not have seen, if you paid attention to my course, you've seen component did mount. This showing up here like so. Does anyone know what this means? That's all right. This is a built-in method. It's taken, you get it when you do this. When you import React, you have access to these methods that are built into React. Component did mount is verifying, basically, it is a trigger. Basically, it's getting invoked at a certain point. Anything on this page is susceptible to being ran when this page hits a certain point of its life cycle. Technically, this is a lifecycle method as well. This is getting triggered when this component is ran. We don't really talk about it much, but that is part of the lifecycle, the actual render. Component did mount is something that happens after the render. So once render is ran, component did mount ought to run and give you a secondary action. I call it like an auxiliary action. You could call it whatever you want, but it's important to know that beside it's something that occurs outside of the main. Here's the page, here's the component. This is what happens when you run it. It is something that once the component is ran and set up and mounted, you could technically fire off subsequent triggers to do more things. A common thing I've seen some people do is trigger their APIs to pull in at that point. So you open the page, then you go hit the API, then you bring it in, then you combine, or then you trigger a page. So, and that can be fine. One reason you probably don't want to do that is, one, you'll get stuck in infinite loop if you're making a state change, and two, if you don't have a great internet connection or the server's not super quick, you're going to go to a page, it's going to spit the page up, and then it's going to flash away, and then it's going to spit the full page up because you got to the page, you made an API call, you changed the component, state changed, and you're going to re-render the page. But that is something people do with component did mount. It's one of the many lifecycle methods. I didn't actually click this link before. Where's this one go? Oh, yeah, it's just all your different lifecycle methods here. But what I did want to show you was this image. So these lifecycle methods basically allow you to hook into a component at the specific point in their life to achieve various things. This image demonstrates some stuff. Here we go. So you can start wherever, what does it say we should start this? At the 12 o'clock position is the component's birth, will mount. So this is where it starts. So before the render ever occurs, you will mount, and then you did mount, and then you receive your props, and then should update with, these props, will update, and then basically that means, yeah, I got all my stuff, I'm going to update, and then you fire off the render. And then you've got a did update and a will unmount. Where's did mount? Yeah, so or does did mount technically fire off before the render? Regardless, you've got these steps that go around, these lifecycle methods within React that you can kind of dial into at certain points. I don't want to dig into each and every one of them and all of the specific reasons you would use them, because you're not going to. The most you're going to see in this course is component did mount and component will receive props. And you're going to see that in your assignment today. Component did mount is by far the most common one you're going to see. It's the only one I've really ever used. It's the only one I've ever seen outside of, Code Platoon, the only projects. The only one I've seen in projects. Component will receive props is fired when something happens with parent component and it cascades the children to the props. When render is fired, that is the point when a component is mounted. So today, as you continue to wire up Articles API, JS module will connect the API from your components you will want to use. Component did mount and component did update. The README is going to help you out with that. So in conclusion, these are auxiliary triggers beyond just the render that you can tap into. Truly and honestly only going to use did mount and what is that, will update. That's what we agreed upon, right? No, sorry, will receive props, which doesn't really show up. And oh yeah, my bad. Will receive props right there. So you will see how these are kind of leveraged within the assignment. You don't have to use these though. And especially in functional-based React, you're not going to use these. The only one of these that really truly exists is use effect. There are some other ways to kind of like tap into this life cycle. But really, truly, and honestly, handlers can accomplish most of what you're doing here. Generally, if you change one thing, you want it to be a very controlled callback to all of the actions you wish to fire off. So your set state hooks should be kind of performing a lot of these actions, or rather the handlers that are going to set state somewhere should be or can be, firing off all of these different auxiliary functions you'd want to do. So if you expected to, make an API call with a lifecycle method prior to passing it on, prior to setting that, giving it away as props, you can do that, or you can simply allow the handler to do it for you. The reason that you'd want to do that is it's quite a bit more controlled. You're not going to have any, I don't know, auxiliary functions are a little kind of scary in React because you get to a point where things are updating without you really truly expecting it. If you don't completely understand what a change could do to the lifecycle method, you're going to get some kind of wonky effects. So my advice is, use component did mount or use effect sparingly. If you can find a way to not utilize them, I think you should. They are a tool and they exist for a reason. But oftentimes, if you feel that you need to use them, it's worth thinking a little bit more about your solution, because making deliberate actions and passing back or having callback functions that trigger a series of events and state changes that are known to you, it's a little bit easier to troubleshoot that. It's a little bit easier to understand what's going on and build out yourself. If you're tapping into lifecycle methods to perform all of these things, you can run into some issues. Sometimes you need it, especially kind of being newer into React. You may feel like you need to wait until the page is run and then perform some actions because you don't exactly know how to pass that information down, and that's fine. But just know it's not the only answer. You can generally get most of what you want to get done with an event handler. Are there any questions?
these methods that you mentioned, they only work with the class components, right? So the corresponding ones for the functional components, I know it's a use effect, but how about the others? There are 3 or 4.
Yeah, they're not one-to-one. There's actually not a functional hook for every every one of the can I pull this up somewhere? I was actually just okay. Don't mind that there's a Facebook link because it's where I was kind of looking for this. You got component did mount, that's use effect. Component will unmount, that is use effect, and then you can return it to call a secondary function. Component did update, you would use effects, and then you can pass on dependencies within this bracket here. Should component update, use React memo. I'm not actually positive what that's talking about, and I was trying to figure that out. Component did catch, there's not a method for that in functional. So as you can see, we actually truly only have use effect, and you can utilize use effect to get some of that similar activity, all trigger around the the initial rendering. But yeah, there are not one-to-one functions to, or sorry, methods to hooks for each of these. And obviously this isn't every lifecycle method, but some of the more common ones. Does that should answer your question, right?
Yeah, it does. Because I only heard of use effect. I'm like, where are the others? But that makes sense.
Yeah, there are other hooks built into React, but they are not what I would consider. Wow, thanks, Warcraft. They're not what I would. They're not called lifecycle methods. They're just going to be hooks. Is kind of the new word. So like use effect is common. Use ref, use query. There are hooks that perform different actions, but we've kind of moved away from a lifecycle method style of thought, and more so callback functions are getting to be a little bit more common. That for some of the reasons that I mentioned, auxiliary functions triggering based off the page doing what you expect it to do. A lot of stuff can really fail if you're a lot of these, components are waiting for the page to run through its normal course. If you've got an issue that occurs and it prevents the page from going through its normal course, that can be a little hard to track down because you've got all these different auxiliaries waiting to fire off, and it's not always so clear where things broke. It's always clear exactly what a break is going to look like because you might have functions that just don't get to run. So deliberately performing actions is, in my opinion, a little bit easier to keep track of and a little bit easier to debug, and probably a better engineering practice. But I'm sure there's some lifecycle method defender out there who's like going to boil their blood when I post this on YouTube. But that's kind of where we're at with functional components, or sorry, functional React. For class React, you can still use them. They exist. I would still consider, not leaning into them too much. And when you go to do your individual projects, if no one's told you this, probably do functional. You can use class-based if you wanted, but if you want your projects to be like bleeding edge, looking cool, I'm a hot new React developer, use functional React for your individual projects. You don't want them to think that you're just learning stuff that went out of date 5-10 years ago. It's good that you know it and you can say that you know it, and you can explain how to convert something from functional class and why you'd want to use one or the other. But don't do your individual projects in class. Any other questions? All right, short lecture. Let me stop recording when I find it.